Network Plus series, Networking Configuration Management. Well, now we're going to move from some of the more practical things to some of the more theoretical things. And configuration management is really a huge movement in networking and networking infrastructure as we look for organized ways to document, control, update, manage, and implement changes in our networking infrastructure. These are actually some well-established disciplines throughout the entire industry. For example, the ITIL, the Information Technology Infrastructure Library, has an entire module or section devoted strictly to configuration management. As a matter of fact, in a large enterprise organization, an IT operator or IT manager may have the role of configuration and change manager. So we're going to look at these aspects here in this particular Network Plus nugget. In this nugget on network configuration management, we're going to conquer four main knowledge areas. First of all, we'll get an overview of network configuration management. Then, we'll talk about and get a look at some physical and logical diagrams and schematics. Then, we'll talk about configuration management policies and procedures and documentation. And then finally, we'll look at some best practices for network configuration management. This nugget's going to be a tad different than the previous nuggets in this series. We're going to start getting into some of kind of the theory of IT management, infrastructure technology management. And this really, configuration management really falls under the category of network systems and network infrastructure life cycle management. And what that really means is that network infrastructure and networking is really kind of organic. It's a ever-evolving, ever-improving process. And so a key aspect of this to be a good network professional is to understand that you need to have in place a good change management system. Now, what is configuration management? When I say configuration management and change management, these are kind of synonymous because you are never going to implement a configuration of any kind in a network environment and then never change it or never modify it. So configuration and change runs hand in hand. So what is change management? Well, it's the process of managing change in your networking hardware, in your networking software, in the firmware, and these can be, updating BIOS updates, firmware updates, things like updating certificates and licensing and keys and things like that. It also means managing the change in documentation and measurements. Let me give you a prime example of changing measurements. Let's say your organization is going to put into place a wireless local area network. Well, you put that wireless networking into place. You place your antennas, you place your wireless access points and your configuration. Well, 3 years later, you realize that your building has changed. The furniture has changed location. You've moved cubicles from one area to the other. You've added, new plants and planters and dividers. Maybe you even changed the building itself. Well, in doing that, you've come to understand that it's actually totally changed the way your wireless network is functioning. So that would be what we call changing measurements and configuration management as far as measurements go. You could also look at this as things like network bandwidth and changing the physical media from Ethernet to fiber, for example. So all of these things go into change. And you have to have a systematic life cycle process for these. Configuration management deals with detailing. And again, when I say detailing, I really mean documentation. Detailing the different states of your configuration. There's always going to be an initial state. And then there's going to be subsequent states throughout this entire life cycle. And that gets us into the concept of a baseline. You're always going to have an initial baseline, an initial configuration. And it's that initial configuration that all of your other changes and your other modifications are measured against. You have to have some starting point, some initialization. And then you can have subsequent baselines along the way. Or you can call these baselines milestones. Okay? So the baseline identification, which is also important, is the process of observing the significant states within your revision history. And so every piece of hardware, every application, every network operating system like Windows 2008, for example, you're going to have a revision history as you add service packs and upgrades and updates. The same thing with antivirus tools and content management or content control devices. Intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, you're going to have updates to the signatures and the signature databases. So there'll be a revision history for your hardware, for your software, for your firmware. It'll also be well documented. And maybe this is going to be documented in paper format, but maybe you're going to document this up on your intranet, okay, your World Wide Web intranet, or maybe you're going to use something like Microsoft's SharePoint. Microsoft SharePoint is a great tool with its document libraries to do configuration management and change management. Now a baseline, as I mentioned, can also mark milestones. So you can think of this maybe as a project management standpoint. Each device, each component, each asset, each piece of software has its own life cycle, and along with these baselines and configuration management, you may have to have an approval workflow built into that. So for example, you may have a change manager or somebody who manages in a software program all the different changes to all these aspects of your network, but there may be a workflow process where some supervisor or some IT manager has to sign off or at least get a copy of all of the changes in the configuration. Okay? And also a goal of configuration management is to generate up-to-date records, up-to-date documentation of all your network components. So at any point in time, you can get a clear picture of the posture of your network infrastructure, the logical view and the physical view. Well, hopefully so far you're starting to see some of the benefits of configuration management and change management, but let me delineate some of these for you. One of the main goals or one of the main benefits of CM is to minimize the impact of changes on your business processes, on your organizational processes and procedures, to lower the impact on end users. And again, end users can be that brand new temporary secretary that you hired all the way up to the CEO. Ultimately, everybody's an end user in the organization. You want to minimize the impact on organization or business productivity, and you want to make sure that implementing changes to configurations of, let's say, routers and switches and firewalls and IDS or IPS, or changes to your access controls on a network operating system, that these are not going to create a security vulnerability. And you're also going to want to make sure that you get the benefits of auditing so that you can keep an eye on administrators and managers who are making changes to configurations. Because remember, somebody who has the power or the authorization to make changes, especially to secure assets and to secure data, also has the power and the ability to abuse that authority. So you want to be able to audit that as well. So change management can be a key aspect of security as well, network security. CM improves asset management, managing your physical assets and access to data. It can also play into assessment, asset assessment and risk assessment. One of the things about change management that's so good is that from time to time, as you do risk assessment, if you have classified your assets and put a value on those assets and documented all the changes to those assets, that will assist you in doing your risk assessment. Also, you want to be able to accurately identify systems. So change management can also play into inventory, for example, especially when it comes to software upgrades and application upgrades and updates, making sure that you're using the same version throughout the organization. Having different versions of network-aware applications and different versions of operating systems on routers and switches and network operating systems, having discrepancies in those operating system versions can have a dramatic impact on your organization. Also, as I mentioned, you get the benefit of better security because you're creating an auditable, logged process of change and configuration management. You may also have to have change management in place because you have to adhere to some legal mandate or some government mandate. For example, like Sarbanes-Oxley or HIPAA. There may be some regulations that your organization, whether you're in the financial industry, the banking industry, the healthcare industry, maybe you're with the Department of Defense, whatever. You have some initiative which compels your organization from a legal standpoint or from a governmental standpoint to implement change management and configuration management. And in the long run, it's going to lower the total cost of ownership, TCO, of software, hardware, and really human resources, supporting your financial budgeting and the acquisition of software and hardware and systems. And again, all of these we're talking about focusing on the networking aspect. You know, as I'm recording this particular nugget, I'm actually looking at an IBM laptop that I have that's in a docking station. And on the bottom of this laptop is a sticker, a white sticker, that has an actual barcode and an identifier for this particular company that I do contract work for. And so this particular asset is part of the corporate inventory. And there's been a chain of custody assigned to this asset so that there was an individual at the company who actually sent this to me through UPS. And so that entire process has been tracked. And so one of the first things you have to do before you can get to the point of documentation is we're going to look at physical and logical diagrams and schematics. One of the first things we have to do is we have to do what's called asset allocation, or you could say this could be inventory management. Before you can start managing change and configuration, you have to actually go through and do an inventory and classify all of your physical assets with some type of naming scheme and numbering convention. You're also going to want to have all of the licensing information for all of your operating systems. You want to have some key management technology for all of your security keys. Maybe you can do this using Kerberos, which is a great key management system, or some type of certificate authority system, maybe Microsoft Windows Server 2008, which has a fantastic certificate authority that you can use. But the bottom line is this: there's information you have to gather before you can start building your physical and logical diagrams and schematics. And one of the main tools of choice out there that you can use to do this would be Microsoft's Visio. And there are many different versions of Visio, and you do not have to understand this application for this particular exam. Remember, the CompTIA and Network Plus exam is vendor neutral. But let's go ahead and talk for a second about Visio, and then we're going to see some sample of physical diagrams, logical diagrams, and schematics that you would create for your networking environment. Well, once you've done your asset management, you've gone through and you've done all of your inventory of all of your hardware and software, and you know where everything's located in your organization, all of your ingress or inbound points, all of your egress and outbound points, you can then use some software like Microsoft Visio and there's other freeware and shareware tools out there to kind of build your physical and logical diagrams and schematics. This is a key part of configuration management and network documentation. You can see a couple of examples of these graphical tools where you can go through here and you can see we can create, if we want to, different types of topologies. Some of these will have some templates built in. Some of these will allow you to start from scratch and use icons that you can download and import into your application like Visio. For example, this is a PDF file that shows some of the iconography, of all the Cisco products, for example. And these are the logical symbols of a wide variety of different devices. And along with these icons, you can download black and white or full color icons like these representing a wide variety of different types of hardware and software components into Microsoft Visio or the other products you're using, and you can use these to build your network diagram or your schematics. And you can see there's a whole bunch of different types of icons for all different types of technology: wired, wireless, voice over IP, wireless LAN controllers. You can see you got little building icons. You can use these, of course, for your wide area network or metropolitan area network logical topology. By the way, in addition to these logical symbols, you can also go up and search on the internet, and you'll find symbols that are actually miniature versions of actual products, like miniature Cisco routers, Cisco switches, Catalyst switches, ASA appliances, and all different types of devices. You can use those symbols too to build more of a physical topology. As you can see here, here's a Visio again, and you can go over here and you can open different types of libraries of objects. You can see you can create lines, and this is obviously to create some software objects. You should go up and download a trial version of Microsoft Visio. I think it's Microsoft Visio 7 or Office 2007. And you can get Visio. There's an evaluation version, and then of course you can go up and you can find free icons that you can import into Visio to build your diagrams. Now again, the CompTIA exam is not vendor specific. You're not going to be tested specifically on how to use a software product like Visio. But from a practical standpoint, you should check out this product or some of the other open source products out there to help build your network diagrams, both logical and physical. As you can see here, I've kind of overlaid within this Visio window another program called eDraw Max, and you can see they just built a internal local area network flow chart of some workflow. And again, that may be part of your process as well. Maybe in dealing with configuration management and change management and incident management, you'll have to use a tool like this to also diagram out the actual workflow process as changes and configurations and incidents get acted upon and approval in the whole process. So again, this is a logical and physical process. Another example here, we've got a south office and a north office. This is a small to medium-sized business scenario, and you can see here they've gone in here and they've created their DSL devices in bridge mode, their Linksys devices, their Belkin devices, their Microsoft Small Business Server. So this is a nice example of a small business physical topology. Here's another example, kind of a larger example of a medium-sized business with a distribution center, a couple of branch offices, headquarters in San Jose with a data center. This is a pretty typical enterprise organization using logical Cisco iconography. And you can see we've got their routers, they've got their internet connection, their frame relay, wide area network. They're using the phone service here for dial-up clients. And for telephony, they've got their routers, their multi-layer switches, their access layer switches, their IP phones. Here's their data center over here. This is their distribution center with their telephony solution. Got a couple of call manager servers there, and then a couple of branches, a branch in New York and a branch in Atlanta. A great example of a enterprise logical diagram using Cisco iconography. This is another example. This would be not a logical but a physical. We're not even using logical symbols really. We're using physical symbols. The actual firewall VPN router here is a WatchGuard 700. You can see the actual physical servers that are being used here. Windows Server 2003 ISA server. A small to medium-sized business physical schemata. And yet, here's another example of a local area network physical diagram. You might want to go ahead and put this on pause and maybe just take a look at this. You can see the network devices, the switches, the Cisco PIX firewall. You've got a wireless LAN controller up there in the right-hand corner. You've got your Exchange server, your mail server. Then you've got a firewall, another firewall. So we've got a Cisco PIX firewall here, and then another firewall. You can see we've got some HP printers and different computers in different departments. You could also add to this, by the way, in all of these examples, and you can see this, we've got some IP addressing networking going on. You're probably going to want to add that as well to your logical diagram or schemata. You're going to want to add the IP addressing hierarchy into that as well. There are other tools like Cisco Mars, and here's DEXC Network Administrator that allows you to kind of get a three-dimensional view of your enterprise network. So these tools are also popular for network management and to allow individuals to dynamically create these diagrams and these schematics in a kind of three-dimensional graphical user interface environment. And they can actually click on these individual devices and actually go and monitor them or access them remotely and perform monitoring and maintenance and control of those individual PCs and devices that are connected to the network. Pretty powerful. And finally, here's actually a low-level physical schematic diagram of the physical networking topology. So you can be a hardcore engineer here and go beyond just physical and logical diagrams to get down to actual infrastructure schematics down at the electrical level, the mechanical level, the physical level, the OSI model. Your organization is definitely going to have change management and configuration management policies. This will be probably written into the governance policy, the overlying policy, or maybe into your security policy. You will have operational guidelines that should be documented in some type of binder or possibly up in an intranet or a SharePoint site in web-based format. You're also going to have step-by-step procedures. These might not be part of the overall security policy, but you want to have these procedures documented, and you want to have training and security awareness for all of your employees from the bottom all the way to the top, because in most organizations, any end user can make a request for a change to a system or a configuration. And, as an organization, you should be open to that, because some of the best ideas can come from some of the people way down in the organizational chart. So one thing you're going to have as part of your procedure is any kind of change or configuration should have some type of authorization, some type of approval process. There should never be just one person in charge. Even if you've got an elaborate delegation of authority in your organization over your networking infrastructure, there should be more than one party involved. There should be some approval workflow process that has to take place for any kind of configuration change. You're probably going to have, in a large enterprise organization, some type of change control group or control board, and that will be headed up by the configuration manager. Now, the configuration manager may be an individual's title, or it may be part of their role. This can be an IT manager, a network engineer, even a CIO, a chief information officer. The request for change should have the proper metadata. What I mean by that is any type of request which should be in some type of written format or web-based format has to have all the proper information that it needs. A date stamp, a time stamp, the nature of the change being requested, the system, the software, the hardware, whether it was done internally, maybe it's an internal product, maybe it's a vendor-supplied product. Remember, if it's a change to a vendor-supplied product, the vendor may have to be consulted about the change. Again, there should also be some type of email attachment, some workflow process attached to it. It should be a formal request that has all the information necessary, and that information should be standardized. So the process should be tested first and documented according to accepted standards that the organization is going to put in place for changing and configuring their network infrastructure. You also want to be able to account for emergency changes. There needs to be some process in place for if things have to happen in an emergency. There needs to be somebody who is the owner of this process, so that's where the buck stops. Also, how do you enforce and deal with unauthorized configuration? So obviously, you want to have a good security auditing in place so that you're auditing all people who have the rights and the permissions to make changes and to apply configurations. And then you need to have some way to enforce and deal with individuals who make unauthorized configurations. An unauthorized configuration would qualify as a security incident. So that may be passed off from configuration management over to your incident management team or personnel. And then, of course, you want to reassess the policies, reassess the procedures, and improve these on a regular basis, a quarterly basis, or a biannual basis. Now, as far as a best practice goes, a lot of the best practices are in this slide right here. But let me give you a sample, kind of prototypical request for change document that you might want to use in your organization. Here's a sample prototypical request for change or request for configuration document called an RFC, not to be confused with the request for comment that you might see out on the internet that's used with IP protocols. But you can see, of course, it's going to have an introductory statement kind of defining this document. It'll have some usage guidelines for how this document should be used. And then you can see we've got some general RFC data here. And this would be the metadata I was talking about. Okay, the title of the change, an identifier, is it an emergency change, who issued it, when was it done, who's the recipient, is there a schedule, post-implementation review. You can also see down here the scope of the change you're asking for, a brief abstract of the change or the configuration, let's say to a router or a switch or to a firewall or to an IDS IPS or maybe a network operating system, then a detailed description. You can also have an addendum attached to this, and then of course what are the benefits expected from this change. You can follow that up with some task information and a description. You can describe any negative results of the change. You can see, was there any performance degradation, redundancy loss, service disruption? Did you have to reboot to do this? Was there any downtime? Did you put in a fallback or a failover mechanism? Did you create a baseline configuration or what we would call a system state configuration so that you could fall back to that system state if the change caused problems? Then of course at the bottom here you can see where we've got the actual approval or rejection process. And again, this is an important part of the process, having some type of workflow and approval, and then a post-implementation review. That's part of the constant ongoing improving of the process. So a very prototypical request for change or request for configuration document that can be used in your network environment. Well, in this nugget of the Network Plus series, we looked at network configuration management, and we covered 4 key knowledge areas. First of all, an overview of network change and configuration management. Then, a survey of physical, logical diagrams and schematics. A brief look at change management policies and procedures. And included in that are some best practices. And then finally, we looked at a prototypical request for configuration, request for change document. I hope this CBT Nugget has been informative for you. I want to thank you for viewing.